welcome to this special segment of TV 95. My partner John Weeks and I are here at the Model Railroad, narrow gauge railroad, here at the fairgrounds in Grass Valley, California. We're excited to have 4 special guests with us today. They're volunteers here at the Model Railroad, and John is going to be talking to them in just a moment. So let's go inside and meet them.
I'm ready for this.
Now that we're here inside, John, why don't you take over and introduce our 4 wonderful guests, starting with this beautiful lady right here.
Okay. Hi, my name is John Weeks, and I'm with TV 95. And your name would be?
Mary Clark.
Mary, it's a pleasure to meet you. And why is it that you're dressed the way you are?
Because I'm dressed as Sarah Kidder,
And Sarah Kidder is?
the president of the Nevada County Narrow Gauge Railroad from 1901 to 1913.
Interesting.
She was the first woman to run the railroad in the United States and possibly the world.
And maybe the only one so far?
I don't know.
And I understand you have other assistants here to help you with what you were doing today. Could
Yes,
you
I
bring them
do.
in and introduce them?
Sure. You guys want to come forward here, please? This is Barry Levy.
And Barry, what do you do here?
I volunteer on our open houses, and we have about 8 open houses a year, and we try to greet everyone and make sure everyone is knowledgeable when they come through the Nevada County Historical Model Railroad.
Okay, do you operate the trains too?
I do.
Oh, good.
All the volunteers operate the trains. We sit at the door, greet guests, and have a good time.
That's the most important part. And next down the line we have
I'm Doug Delver.
The
I'm
camera.
gonna switch places
the
here.
camera here, Doug, right there.
Yeah, my name's Doug Delvin. I'm another one of the volunteers here. I've been with this Model Railroad group since about 2007, and seen a few changes with operation. We've gone from some types of controllers we used, and now we're running with cell phones. So we have upgraded this is a really nice historic layout, but we've upgraded a lot of the features that allow us to operate it.
Doug, would you explain what you mean by now you use cell phones?
Well, we originally used the controllers that came with the power system that was purchased for the layout here, which was made by NCE, North Coast Engineering, back east. And when you get a power system connected to the track, you also get the hand controllers that would talk to the main power controller. And we have recently gone with a more modern technique where this company, this organization called JMRI, produces software that can run on computers and can send the proper commands to the various companies' power systems that run the track. And all you have to use is the proper app on a cell phone that talks to the software in the laptop through a network. And now we've run one event late last year using cell phones, and we're very happy with the way it's running. And it's new for us, but we think we're going to continue that way.
Thank you. Barry, we've already talked to you, but what is your main function?
I was elected vice president this year, along with Mary as president. Doug
Who's
is our
Mary?
treasurer.
We're talking to Sarah.
Sarah. You're gonna- And
Okay.
Doug's our treasurer, and Andrew is our secretary. And so we have regular meetings once a month, and we try to keep the railroad going as a volunteer nonprofit.
Okay, thank you, Barry. And the young man down on the end?
The man on the caboose is?
And who are you?
My name's Andrew Langdon, and I was once a young man here. I joined when I was 12. I just turned 37 last week, so...
Oh my goodness, have you been involved that long?
Yeah, I was gone to college for a number of years, and moved back and got involved again, and they quickly made me secretary, so here I am. Still participating in the group, glad to be a member of it. It's a nice part of history, and a good combination of that and model railroading, so...
And obviously you operate the trains because you had the little gizmo.
Yeah, that was my phone you were holding a minute ago, so yeah.
Do all of you operate the trains, or are some relegated to just maintenance away?
We try to designate an operator so we don't end up with the fights like Doug and I were having earlier, where we're both trying to change the speed of the same train at the same time. But it is something that, you know, we can assign a person to each a train, and they all run individually, which makes it run a little more realistically, so.
Who's in charge of making sure how the computer keeps the trains separated?
I guess that's Doug and I that kind of do the electronic stuff. He's the electronic engineer. I just like to tinker with computers, so. But that it's whoever's running, it's their individual responsibility to make sure that the trains don't run into each other. That does occasionally happen.
Thank you.
Although it never happened on the real NCNG. Well,
Their accident record's probably better than ours, actually.
Well, there was a train wreck.
Yeah, there were a
train
few.
wreck.
There were a few.
Yeah, well, the one that I remember reading about in the narrow gauge book was the one in 1893, where it was a bunch of animals that were
Yes,
in it.
the circus
Train
train
wreck?
wreck, and
Yeah.
Sarah can tell you all about that.
Okay, Sarah, you're on.
In 1893, there was a circus that came to town and they loaded the animals onto the narrow gauge and brought it into Grass Valley for a performance. And when they were going back, it took 2 trains, and one train had gone as far as Cress's Summit and stopped and waited, and the second train came along, and the story goes that a couple of the draft horses, the circus horses, shifted their weight going around a curve, and the boxcar became top-heavy and fell off the side of the track. And sadly, luckily none of the animals were hurt, but sadly 2 humans were killed in the accident.
Oh, I'm sorry about that, yeah.
And there's actually a model
new
of
meaning
that
to
on the layout over here.
Okay, we'll
brings new
go.
meaning to the word sideshow.
Yes. And consequently, there was never a circus brought into Grass Valley again by train after that. People had to go to Colfax or to see it.
Okay, was it the Ringling Brothers or?
It was the Sells and Renfro Circus.
Oh, okay, I didn't check that. Okay, now let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about this facility. Why was this important to be built here at the fairgrounds? I mean, what's the importance of it?
Well, in the mid-1980s, a group of men who were train enthusiasts and local history enthusiasts got together and decided, they made a presentation to the fair board and were granted permission to build this layout here in the building here because they wanted to share the history. And it's amazing to me even today how many people don't realize that there actually was a railroad in Nevada County.
And it went from Colfax to Nevada City?
Yes, through Chicago Park and Grass Valley and up to Nevada City.
Did it start from Colfax and go down to Grass
It
Valley? or did
basically
start at Grass Valley?
started, well, since it was the Nevada County narrow gauge, it moved from Nevada City through Nevada County down to Colfax where it met up with the transcontinental trains.
I see.
And they had a transfer shed with narrow gauge track on one side and standard gauge on the other side that they could offload
Yeah.
product.
Very good. And can you talk a little bit about the Kidder Mansion that's no longer here?
And the
As a
Kidder,
matter of fact, we have a Kidder Mansion here, don't we?
we do,
Would you care to stand by your home?
it's right here. And it was on the corner of Bennett and Kidder Avenue, Bennett Street, I'm sorry, and Kidder Avenue. It was right in the rail yard, basically, because John and Sarah Kidder wanted to keep close tabs on their railroad. John Kidder actually started as surveyor and eventually worked his way up to president of the railroad. The rail yard, you can still see the wall that was the Grass Valley Depot wall. And that area where the depot and the shop were is completely empty at this point, just weeds and grasses growing there. The Kidder Mansion was eventually, when Sarah sold the railroad in 1913 and moved to San Francisco, after that the mansion was turned into apartments and eventually went downhill, as many old homes do that aren't maintained as properly as they should be.
Okay, so that's the history of the Kidder Mansion.
And there are still some of the plantings visible there on that property.
Oh, okay.
And the house on the corner across the street is still standing.
And is there a name to that house?
I believe it's called Hope House.
Okay, and what is the function of that?
I believe it's a currently a home for women that have been abused.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Now, I understand, Mrs. Kidder, that your husband, John, over the period of time when he was president, never really distributed any dividends to the shareholders.
No,
Do you have
he-
anything to say about that?
No, he did not. He was involved with a friend, and they had a mine called the Riddick Mine, which is Kidder spelled backwards.
Oh.
And my belief is that possibly some of the proceeds from the railroad might have helped fund that mine.
Now, it's my understanding that when you were president, things were a little bit different as far as dividends went.
Yes, we paid dividends to our stockholders during most of the 12 years that I ran the railroad. We also moved the crossing on the Bear River. It was a wooden trestle or wooden bridge across the river, and we shortened the line by approximately 2 miles and built a steel bridge, which was the tallest bridge on the west coast. Right, it was 100 and over 100 feet tall.
It was a long and tall bridge, folks.
Yes.
Well, I understand when the first one was built, the wooden one, there were a lot of people that came out to watch it crossing the bridge because they weren't sure the weight of that locomotive would hold up on that wooden bridge.
Yes, I did hear that, and they also had to be very careful because this was a steam locomotive. It was run on either wood or coal. And they had, with the wooden trestle, you have a chance of fires.
Okay.
Now, in later years, I understand that that area where that bridge was, there's now a reservoir. And
Yes.
in order to build the reservoir, they had to demolish the bridge. What happened to doing that?
Well, I believe that was in 1963 that they came out, and they had a whole bunch of dignitaries come out from Sacramento and what have you, and they had this big ceremony where they were going to blow up the bridge. They'd set dynamite down underneath it, and when they set off the dynamite, the bridge kind of went and settled back down and was still standing there. And from a man that was in the audience, he said there was just dead silence after that until finally somebody started kind of chuckling, and then everybody started laughing. And they went on, and the next day they had to have a crew come out with cutting torches and bulldozers and take the bridge down.
Okay.
And that's where Rollins Dam is today.
Oh, that's interesting. Can one of the other volunteers talk about a cow catcher?
Who wants
I'm
to tell
sure
us what a cow
Andrew can
catcher
tell
is?
us about
Andrew.
that.
What's a
didn't hear
cow
Andrew.
catcher?
Well, cow catcher is, as the name suggests, it was originally sort of a wedge shape, typically up front of an engine. The trains back in the day moved pretty slowly. We tried to run ours scale 25 miles an hour or so. So they weren't moving too quickly, but you would get cattle and livestock, various sorts, wandering onto the tracks.
Because they wandered free in those.
Correct, yeah, in a lot of places they did. And you didn't want to injure the cattle or people on the train, so the cow catcher could function to sort of persuade them off the track. Hopefully the engineer was watching and managed to slow the train. We were talking earlier, they later changed the name to a pilot, and they removed that function of actually moving cattle as things got more developed and there was less roaming wildlife. But still, it served a function to sort of guide the train. You'll see a small wheel underneath the front of a lot of locomotives, sometimes two of them, which helps guide the locomotive down the tracks. It doesn't function to power the train. That's the drive rods that come after it.
Is there a specific individual that's assigned to set up, like, for instance, for the 4th of July or?
Well, we all pretty much partake in all of it. We have once a month, we have a workday Saturday. We come in and we clean and we make sure everything's dusted, the trains are running. This last workday, we made sure that everything was really nice. We have a little spray that we have that Sarah has provided to make sure that everything's clean and the trees are looking nice and the buildings are clean, because we have to do housekeeping in spring.
I'd like to bring Andrew back and ask Andrew, as a 12-year-old, what got you interested in coming here, and what kept you here? You said you went away to school and.
Yeah, well, I've always been enamored with trains, so I still have my basket of Brio wooden trains from when I was a little kid. My nephews now
Got some
enjoy.
Thomas the Train
I have to
there?
help them play with them, of course, but it's more like work now.
Does he have any Thomas the Train?
My nephews do. I don't
Oh, okay.
personally. Yeah, but
My grandson did.
yeah. So as soon as the railroad opened, my parents, who were always good at pointing out the trains, had to bring me down and show me. Of course, back then this looked quite a bit different. It was a lot of bench work, and underneath the track, there's just well, in parts where there's only a single track, there's just a piece of wood supporting the track with a little bit of sort of like cork underneath it, homosote we call it, to dampen the sound. And so it was just open bench work, framing with the wood strip, the homosote, and the hand-laid rail on top, and the trains were running on that. Some of the engines weren't painted back then, so they were still brass, and that was kind of interesting to see. Just the bare metal at the engines are all brass engines on this model.
I was just elected in December, so I'm started as in my office in January.
Okay. And how many members or
We have
volunteers
about
do you
12 volunteers.
Okay. And Doug had mentioned that, I think it was Doug or maybe it was Barry, had mentioned that this place, you do have to pay rent for using
Yes.
this facility. And the way that you keep the funding going is donations.
Correct.
And how does that work for you?
Most of the time, it works fairly well. We have, people come in and fall in love with our little layout here, and I have a lot of young people that come in and say this is their favorite part of the fair.
Do you have any grant writers that can help you with getting?
No,
grant
we've
money?
never gone for that, or we've been able to function completely on donations,
Well,
and
that's good.
so.
If someone wanted to be a volunteer, or as you say, a member here, what is the process that they have to go through to be a member or be a volunteer?
All they have to do is talk to one of the volunteers that are here now and fill out a small questionnaire, which is basically name, address, phone number, and express an interest, and we'll welcome them with open arms.
And I understand you have books that they can read?
Yes, there's books on the history of the area, which that was the other thing besides trains. I love local history, so this is kind of the
Yeah.
best. It works well for me. I get trains and history.
Oh, very good, Mary.
Now, over here to the right, we have what I'm assuming is the Grass Valley Depot and
Correct.
maintenance shed.
Yes,
That
And
big long building
the
is
big
made?
long building is the maintenance shed, yes.
Where exactly was the headquarters for the narrow gauge
The
railroad?
headquarters was in the Grass Valley Depot.
In the depot. Now, the depot has the distinction of being a rather warm place to be at certain times in its history.
Yes, it did have have a fire here or there. And it actually burned down, I believe that was in 1930s, late 1930s. But by that time, they weren't really carrying passengers anymore, so it wasn't as important to them, because as the cars started taking over and you could get to Colfax faster in your truck or your
Yeah.
car than you could on the railroad, they lost a lot of passengers, so they stopped their passenger service and were mostly freight.
Okay.
Now, one of those fires, it did burned up a lot of railroad records, and didn't that save Mrs. Kidder a lot of trouble with someone?
Back to the Mrs. Kidder part.
Yes, I believe it did.
Enough said. What can you tell me, or what can one of the other gentlemen share about the Coleman brothers? I understand there were 8 or 9 Coleman brothers, and 2 of them were very involved in the railroad. I think David was the president for a while, and then his brother John was more involved in the quartz mining.
Yeah,
Can you tell us about the Colemans?
Yeah, the Coleman brothers, from what I understand, they came from England originally, and they moved into the area and invested in the mine that later became the North Star mine. That was where they started their investments here. After a few years, they sold their interest, and they made a fairly good profit, and they kind of thought the veins were going to play out, I guess, there, and they went into the Idaho Quartz Mining Company. And that was probably a mistake, because later the Nevada, the North Star turned out to be quite profitable. Anyway, the two Coleman brothers were part of that original group of 20, as I mentioned before, and John Coleman became the chairman of that committee, and he kind of was the main organizer and directed them to follow the right functions they had to get through to get the easements and the approvals for the railroad. And so they were pretty active in the mining circles, and then later active in the railroad. John actually became, I think when John was the committee chairman, I think the treasurer was his brother too. So that's about the extent of what I know about the Coleman
Oh,
brothers.
thank you, Doug. Okay.
Why, what's significant about engine number 5 that you would make it run for us?
Engine number 5 is the last existing locomotive from the Nevada County Narrow Gauge steam roster anyway. Most of the railroad was scrapped in 42 and 43, and some of the engines were sent to Pearl Harbor for the war effort at the time. Engine number 9 went over there. Engine number 5 had a career in Hollywood and came back here in the late 80s after this model was already built, or at least in the process of being built. And so engine number 5 is a fun one to run because it's the last existing one. People can go see the real one up at the museum in Nevada City, and they can see it run on the model of the original railroad in the 30s here in Grass Valley at the fairgrounds. So that's a 260. It's probably easier to see in these larger ones. This is the cow catcher mentioned earlier.
Oh, that's a cow catcher.
This is a 260 here. Okay, so it's got one pilot set of wheels, if you will, that roll. It's got 6 driving wheels, so multiply times 2 for the other side. And it's an O at the end because there's no trailing wheel. Some of the larger engines had a trailing wheel or 2. This is a 440, they call it an American type locomotive. You can see this cab forward modeled from the standard gauge railroad where it met up with the narrow gauge. In Colfax, this one's actually a 4882. And this is an example where you call it just a pilot. It's basically a snowplow on the front there, but they weren't really worried about cattle so much with the mainline trains there. This extra set of numbers there, so the second set of 8 drivers, so this is a rather large engine that ran over the hill.
So we have 2 different gauges over there.
The Nevada County narrow gauge, as the name suggests, was a narrow gauge. There are many different narrow gauges around the world. This one happened to be a 3-foot narrow gauge, which is more common as the narrow gauges go. So there's 3 feet between the rails. And it's a common point of confusion for people coming and see the layout because they see the narrow gauge track and think it's HO scale, where in fact this is entirely O scale. It just happens that the O scale narrow gauge 3-foot width of rails is very slightly larger than HO standard gauge. If that isn't confusing enough. So the entire layout, with the exception to the large scale stuff on the wall, is in O scale.
This has been extremely interesting. I thank Andrew and Barry and Doug and Sarah Mary, and of course John, and I thank our cameraman Vern and editor Kent, and we will really enjoy sharing this with our community to find out, well, like, I have never been here before. This was my first time. But we've been very fortunate that both the editor and John are real engineers that ran real trains, not in this area, but you did what, Amtrak trains?
Santa Fe Railroad and Amtrak.
And Kent? Our
Southern
editor.
Pacific and Union Pacific.
All right.
Over the mountain.
Chug-a-lugged up those mountains, huh? Well, thank you very much, and I hope our viewing audience will get some real good information that we've provided for you today, and I hope you'll come and visit this model Narrow Gauge Railroad Museum.
And this has been brought to you by JV 95, celebrating 20 years of faithful service to the community.
So until next time, have a wonderful, blessed day, and your sign-off is?
My sign-off is ta-ta for now.
Thank you. Thanks for watching.
you.